He is a director of and president of the Science and Environmental Policy Project in Fairfax, Virginia. More importantly, as an example, as he sat down there, he gave me a copy of a few very recent articles, like in the last 2 or 3 weeks, of his that have been published. The Wall Street Journal, Nature, New York Times, other similar publications. Dr. Singer has shown that he has a very high degree of talent for putting the truth about environmental issues before the general public, and a tremendous amount of energy in doing so. Perhaps one of the most effective, if not the most effective, single individual for giving this information to the public in a way that they understand. So we're very pleased today to have an opportunity to have an hour of his talent. Thank you.
It's good to be back here with this group. I enjoyed addressing you a couple of years ago in Tucson, and I wanted to bring you up to date on the stratospheric ozone situation, but I thought I would present 2 different topics in this 1 hour, spend maybe half my time on the stratospheric ozone problem, and spend the other half hour or so on the issue of global warming to supplement some of the things that Sally Balunis told you. She referred to me once or twice during her talk, and I thought I'd save my points for later. So that's what I intend to do. There have been a few new developments on the stratospheric ozone issue, and those are the ones I want to bring to your attention. You'll find in your folder a review article that I've done for a magazine called Technology, Journal of Franklin Institute, and that's expresses the current view to which many of us subscribe. A large number of us who have this point of view. We are, I should say, involved in a controversy with many others, particularly with the politically correct position which the administration has taken, and particularly with the position that politicians have taken on what's called the Montreal Protocol. As you probably know, the Montreal Protocol is an international agreement that has now resulted in the complete production ban on CFCs and other useful chemicals. And right now, in 1996, we're celebrating, if I may use that word, complete freedom from the production of CFCs. And those of you who have been buying it for your car air conditioners will know that the price of CFCs has gone up from about $1 a pound to about $30 a pound now. And you can look forward to spending something of between several $100 up to $1,000 on having your air conditioner fixed in your car. So, congratulations. Our view, of course, is that the phase out of CFCs was done in a hasty fashion with little regard for the underlying science. It's a very costly affair to the American public and to many other nations as well. But let me tell you, that this phase out of CFCs, the ban on CFC production, is nothing compared to what's being planned in the global warming issue, where there's an effort now underway, which I'll be talking about later, on reducing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, or reducing the amount of carbon dioxide emitted. And this means, of course, reducing the amount of energy that's produced, and that will have a much larger economic impact and a much worse economic impact than anything that can happen with CFCs. I wanted to start out with a kind of a funny slide here about my friend Ed. You'll recognize him soon as you see him. Here he is. I have to cover up here because, you know, this is a strip, so you have to see the first one first. Okay? Now here he is. He's worried about the greenhouse effect and about the ozone layer. I don't know why he's coughing, but this is the cartoonist saying this. And he was worried about foul beaches, pesticides in food, and so on. And finally he decided that the world was too dangerous for him. And he retired. He never went out again, and he stayed in his home. And then the radon got him. It tells you that life is full of risks, and it's impossible to have a risk-free situation. Zero risk is impossible. And what we're talking about here all day long, and I suppose from now on out, is how to balance risks, how to use our limited resources to take care of the most important health risks, and not waste our time and money on phantom risks, on risks that are unimportant. And the stratospheric ozone issue that I'll be discussing will, I think, in retrospect, be viewed as one of those minor risks, something that's not really very important, but something that got people very excited in the 1980s and 1990s. And maybe 10 years from now we'll look back on this and we'll say, why did we ever do this? Why did we get so excited about this? Let me remind you about some of the issues that are important here. The first issue, of course, is there really a depletion of ozone? Is ozone diminishing in the stratospheric layers? It's become a kind of a mantra now. People keep repeating ozone depletion, ozone depletion, ozone depletion. But is it really occurring? Well, let me show you something. This is the considered view of researchers who've been publishing on this. Let me read you just the headline. Revision of 20 years of Dobson total ozone data, fictitious Dobson total ozone trends induced by sulfur dioxide trends. This simply says, and there's a long abstract attached to this, that the trends on ozone, the depletion trend that's been reported, is fictitious. It isn't real. And it's come about because the instruments that are being used, the Dobson instruments, are being affected by sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere. And as you know, coal burning and other kinds of activities produce sulfur dioxide. But because of the fact that sulfur dioxide is now diminishing because of pollution control, the instrument thinks that ozone is diminishing. The instrument can't distinguish between ozone and sulfur dioxide. So this is one of the problems that has not yet been settled, in spite of what you may hear. Another problem, if you try to establish a trend in any geophysical quantity, is the fact that it's very noisy. This is the actual record of ozone at just one location from 1957. Many of the records only started in 1957. So we really only have less than 40 years, almost 40 years worth of data, which is not very long. That's what you see. Tremendous variations from day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year, seasonal variations, yearly variations, and of course variations with the solar cycle, which I'll be showing in a minute. Even when you average over the globe, which you would think would reduce the amount of noise that you're seeing now, the variations are still pretty strong. These are global averages now, taken from satellites. So these are really good data. But you see the strong variations, and you'll see trends. Sometimes the trend is down, sometimes the trend is up. This is taken directly from one of the research papers that NASA has published. Well, if you have both upward trend and downward trend, how do you know what the long-term trend is? Well, that's the problem. So let's look at the longest record we have. This is a record of about 35 years, again starting in 1957, and now this has been smoothed, completely smoothed, so that the day-to-day trends and month-to-month trends are taken out. And now you see, for the first time, an 11-year cycle, which of course mirrors the solar sunspot cycle. And here is the sunspot cycle. And just looking at it, you can see that there's a correlation, a strong correlation, but not a perfect correlation. When you have lots of sunspots, you have more ozone in the atmosphere. When you have fewer sunspots, less ozone. I've just shown two records here, one in the high north and one in more temperate latitudes, let's say corresponding to the central United States. Now what I want you to notice is not only that there isn't a perfect correlation, so you cannot really predict what the ozone is by looking at the sunspots. Oh. But the other thing I want you to know is that each cycle is different. You can't tell what the next cycle is going to look like. These are not regular cycles. There's no reason to expect that the next cycle will be anything like the ones we've had in the past. And that's why it's hard to tell whether there's really a depletion of ozone. I'm willing to accept that there might be one, but you have to prove it. This remains to be done. Let me also show you something quite interesting that Sally referred to earlier, and that is something about the sunspots over the last 400 years. Excuse me, 300 years. Here you see the famous Maunder minimum. This is the maximum sunspot number starting around 1650, I think. Can you see it all? And I'm really wondering, this is something I think we will have to talk about afterwards, Sally, what might have happened to ozone in around the year 1700? You see, if ozone depends on the sunspot number, and if ozone goes down, if the amount of ozone goes down when sunspots go down, what happens if sunspots disappear? What happens to the ozone layer in the atmosphere? How far down will it go? And if it really went down very far in the year 1700, what did it do to people? Did it kill everyone? Obviously it didn't. Did it kill all the animals? It didn't. Did it kill all the plants? It did not. So I think you can perhaps do some historical research, and maybe we should do this, and try to figure out what has happened to ozone over the last 300 or 400 years, and what were the effects of these large natural variations in ozone on the biosphere, on living things on the Earth. And if we can do that, it's a big research job, but if we can do that, if we can find the data, then I think we can counteract some of the propaganda that's being handed out, some of the scares that are being published about ozone depletion. Now, you know, of course, it's not really the ozone we care about. The ozone is way up there in the stratosphere. We're down here on the surface of the Earth. The reason one is concerned about ozone is because ozone absorbs some of the ultraviolet radiation from the sun. Ozone absorbs the so-called UVB. That's the radiation in a particular region of wavelength region, I think from 280 to 320 nanometers. And UVB is radiation that will affect the skin, cause sunburn, and if you get a lot of it over many, many years, maybe over decades, it will produce a mild form of skin cancer called basal cell or squamous cell skin cancer, which can be easily cured. For those who are propagandizing about the ozone depletion, of course, would like to be able to say that as a result of ozone depletion, ultraviolet radiation at the surface of the Earth has been rising. The trouble with that is the data don't show it. The data show the opposite. Let me show you what the data show. These are actual measurements of UVB done with actual meters, with instruments, as you see, at 8 different locations in the United States, from Tallahassee, Florida, to Bismarck, North Dakota. So at various latitudes. In fact, we went all the way down to El Paso, Texas. And the highest one is at Minneapolis, Minnesota. And these are the data over an 11-year period. There's no steady increase. In fact, I would say there's a slight decrease in ultraviolet, which is as yet somewhat unexplained. It certainly is not what you would expect if ozone really were being depleted. So the data do not support the scare stories that you're hearing about ozone depletion and a rise in ultraviolet radiation. I'll take another look at this slide and you'll see something else that's very interesting. You'll see that the average intensity of UV in Minneapolis is roughly half of what it is in El Paso. Or put it another way, the intensity in El Paso is 100% greater than what it is in Minneapolis. There's a large geographic variation in the average intensity of ultraviolet. Why is that important? Well, it's important because the scare stories about ozone depletion are about a few percent change in ozone, or if you like, a few percent increase in ultraviolet. That's what it's all about. When you really examine the research papers and the underlying science of the Montreal Protocol, you'll find that people are concerned about a 10% increase in ultraviolet. And here we have a 100% increase just going from Minnesota to Texas. And I don't think that people in Texas are any sicker or worse off than the people in Minnesota. I think the animals in Texas are quite happy, and I think the plants in Texas are quite happy. I don't know about any great health problems. We're being told that ultraviolet B attacks the immune system. People in Texas dying of immune diseases. I don't know about that. Are they having unusual amounts of cataracts? I don't know about that either. So it seems that these health fears that you've been reading about can be easily dismissed by just looking at the data. And here are the data that tell you by direct measurement that the ultraviolet radiation in the south of the United States is 100% greater than what it is in the north. In 1993, just 3 years ago, there was great excitement. A paper appeared in the very respected science journal called Science, claiming that there was a great upward trend in ultraviolet. Finally, they found an upward trend, they said. It was so exciting that it was written up in all the newspapers. And I got lots of phone calls about this, and I said, I'm sorry, we haven't seen the paper yet. It hasn't appeared in print. Well, of course, you know, they hand out the publicity story 2 weeks before the paper appears in print so that the newspapers can write it up. But I knew there was something wrong because the news story said that the UV intensity was rising at the rate of 35% per year. That's laughable. 35% per year? Just think about this. That's unbelievable. Well, when the paper finally appeared, the data looked like this. And indeed, you can see here a little orange line. Look at the data for 300 nanometers. Little orange line saying that the winter data were rising, winter intensity of ultraviolet was going up between 1989 and 1993, rising at 35% per year. How did they do this? Well, it's very simple. They made a mistake. Let me show you what really happened. Pat Michaels, who is my colleague at the University of Virginia, and I published a little paper in Science to demonstrate what happened. Here's what happened. These are just the winter data here, just the winter data, and this is the straight line they drew, the straight line that we draw. And here's what happened. There were 4 points, 4 days of very high intensity, and these guys just drew a straight line. And when we looked at the actual rate, increasing rate per year, we found it was just about 0. Statistically, it was 0. There was no increase. So that blew away. Well, the latest in the story just happened this week. This week we read in the paper, yesterday, I read in the paper, in the Washington Post, story by Kathy Sawyer, that NASA has now found increasing levels of ultraviolet. They claim to have measured them. They didn't. They calculated them. How do they calculate them? Well, they calculate them by looking at what they think is happening to ozone. So it's kind of a circular reasoning, you see. But they claim to have measurements without having any. So we can dismiss what's being published. But it creates a lot of excitement, and people actually begin to believe it. Well, let me tell you one more thing, and remind you of one more thing before I leave the ozone story. What everyone is afraid of course, and what has scared people about a possible depletion of ozone and about a possible rise in ultraviolet is the idea that there might be an increase in malignant melanoma, the serious form of skin cancer. And indeed, as you know, malignant melanoma has been rising rapidly. It's a very dangerous form of skin cancer. It's been going up year by year, but not because of ozone. Because the data show, again, good data show, that it's been rising since 1935. Long before CFCs were in the market, long before there was any concern about ozone. We think the reason for the rise has to do with exposure, people's lifestyles. But now the question always has been, what is producing melanoma? Well, this question was finally settled, I think, by a research paper published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences 3 years ago, Wavelength Effective in Induction of Malignant Melanoma. What these authors show, and this is now becoming generally accepted, they show that melanoma is caused by ultraviolet radiation, but not in the band that's absorbed by ozone. It's caused by UVA, which is between 320 and 400 nanometers, where ozone has no absorption. In other words, the amount of ozone is irrelevant to melanoma. And I think this is something that needs to be broadcast widely before people are taken in again. Because EPA keeps insisting that the benefits of removing CFCs are so great because it reduces cancer mortality, and they consider melanoma to be part of that. I think Sally and I were both there last year when Mary Nichols, Assistant Administrator of EPA, testified, with a straight face, mind you, with a straight face, that the benefits of phasing out CFCs amounted to $32 trillion. Trillion dollars. I mean, this figure just boggles your mind. Unfortunately, none of the congressmen asked her how she would justify this number. And we were unable, since we had already testified, we could not question her, or we couldn't cast aspersions on her testimony. It was very frustrating because I desperately wanted to get up and ask, how did you get this number? What data do you have to back it up? What is it based on? Can you justify it? Of course, it cannot be justified. The final matter that I'd like to discuss with you about ozone is perhaps the most interesting, because it may turn out that our policies to, quote, save the ozone layer, unquote, we may be barking up the wrong tree. Let me explain why. Here's a theoretical paper published recently. Oops. I have to find it first. It's a calculation about various chemical processes that can destroy ozone in the lower stratosphere. Well, it's over here, it's still here. Before I do this, for historical reasons, and many of you have already seen this, let me show you a different slide. This one was put out by NASA and the Department of Transportation. It's a very official slide. It tells you something about the theories that are being used to calculate a future ozone depletion. Something you should keep in mind when you think about global warming, because there also we're using theories to calculate a future global warming. This wonderful slide here shows the depletion of ozone, or the change in ozone in percentages. Not as a function of time, but at the time it was the report was published. These are all calculations, and this is the date of publication of the calculation. It starts out at the time of the SST, the supersonic transport. This NOx is supposed to be the agent that removes ozone. A 70% depletion, which is off scale. That was 1972. Let's forget that. It dropped to 10%, then to 5%, and then miraculously it became positive. It turned out that aircraft exhausts would increase the amount of ozone. The thing changed sign. Then it changed sign again, and it became negative. Now these are reputable calculations published in the literature, assembled by NASA. So they were, and according to the year in which they appeared. Now, what happened here is that people lost interest in aircraft and became interested in CFCs. So here is the effect of CFCs. First a 50% depletion, it dropped to 10%, then it became 20%, and then it became smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And then something else happened. The Antarctic ozone hole was discovered, but it was never predicted by the theory, so they stopped calculating and publishing. These are National Academy figures, and they haven't published any more figures since, realizing that the theory was inadequate. Well, they're trying again, and here is a calculation. It's a very technical graph, but I'll try to simplify it. This looks at the rate of destruction of ozone, at various altitudes, from 5 kilometers up to 50 kilometers. The stratosphere starts at about 12 kilometers. So this is the lower stratosphere here. And the largest rate of destruction is over to the right. Is this dashed line. And the dashed line says the destruction is due to OH, NO3, or HO2 and O3. These are radicals, chemical radicals, derived from water vapor, not from chlorine. Chlorine only becomes important above 25 kilometers. You see chlorine here becomes important above 25 kilometers. But below 25 kilometers, radicals derived from water vapor are most important. I'm working on this problem. I'm trying to publish a full paper. I've now published an abstract of my work. And the idea is simply that human activities are increasing water vapor in the stratosphere. So if anything is depleting ozone due to human activities, it is water vapor. Now where does the water vapor come from? Well, water vapor in the stratosphere comes from methane produced by human activities. And where does that come from? That comes from the raising of cattle and rice growing right here on the surface of the earth. So it is the increase in methane, it's really the rise in population, which leads to a need for rice and for cattle. That's driving the agricultural activities that produce more methane, which in turn percolate into the stratosphere and there turn into water vapor, which in turn can attack the ozone. Well, this esoteric discussion, of course, is not yet completed, but I hope it will survive the reviews of the referees and finally appear in print. When it does, if and when it does, I think it'll open a few eyes and people will wonder, why are we getting rid of CFCs when we really should be getting rid of cattle. I have a lot to say about the global warming issue. And I'll confine myself to talking about a controversy which has occupied us now over the last 2 months very, very intensively. Again, if you look at your folder, you'll find an op-ed article by Dr. Frederick Seitz, who is the chairman of the Marshall Institute, happens to be also chairman of my organization, is also the chairman of Science and Engineers for Secure Energy. He's certainly one of the most distinguished scientists in the United States, former president of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. His article in the Wall Street Journal has really raised a firestorm. What he has posited and demonstrated is that the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the UN scientific advisory body on the climate issue, that this IPCC group has changed one of their reports between the time it was approved and the time it was printed. And this change was done without telling anyone, except they were found out because the final draft does exist and the printed version now exists. It was published in May, and when the two were compared, it was discovered that certain changes had been made. And these changes certainly affected the tone or conclusion of the report. And that's unforgivable, according to Fred Seitz, and I certainly agree with him. So what has happened? What actually happened? It turns out that the changes were made in Madrid after the meeting of the group that approved the report last November. I happened to be in Madrid for this meeting. I remember the discussion of the summary, but not of the report. And certainly there was no discussion about any changes to the report itself. Plenty of discussion about the summary. Now you have to understand that the summary is a political document occupying 4 pages. The report is a scientific document occupying perhaps something like 400 pages, some of that order. I don't want to get into the legalities of this, whether the changes, whether it is legal to make changes. Someone else can figure that one out. What I'm interested in is, why were these changes made? Why was it necessary to change a scientific report without telling anyone? Well, we get different answers. The man who made the changes, who actually made the actual changes, claims in print that he did this because he received lots of comments about the report, and he felt it was important to have a scientific consensus. That sounds fairly reasonable. But the IPCC officials, the people who run the IPCC, were much more straightforward about it. They revealed in an interview with Nature magazine that the changes were made so that the report, the scientific report, would conform with the summary. Now think about this for a minute. It's usually the summary that conforms with the report. Not in this case. The summary, the political document, had been agreed to in Madrid, and therefore it was important for them to make sure that the scientific report would back the summary. And I believe that's the reason for the changes. They have been criticized before. Their earlier report of 4 years ago was heavily criticized because the summary bore no relation to the report. And politicians, if they read at all, read only the summary. They don't even read that. They will read the executive summary of the summary, or they'll read a press release about the summary. But should they read the summary, that would be a big step forward, but they certainly would not read the underlying report. But it's on the basis of these changes But the IPCC now claims that their report, or their summary, is backed by, I don't know, hundreds of scientists, thousands of scientists. You know, they mention numbers very freely, and of course they talk about a scientific consensus. Let me tell you that there's not a scientific consensus at all. There's a growing number of scientists in this field, who work in this field, who are very skeptical of the summary and of the conclusions reached there. Of course, as you can imagine, I'm one of those, we're being marginalized. We're being told, and I'm quoting now some wonderful words, that we're a dwindling band of skeptics, while in fact our number is growing every day. And we're being told that we are a tiny minority of dissidents, by Al Gore, who also, I want to use his actual words, accuses us of comparing or calling global warming, let's see, the words are the empirical equivalent of the Easter Bunny. Those are his words, honest. It won't help them. 4 years ago, over 4,000 scientists signed the Heidelberg Appeal, addressed to statesmen who met and finally signed the Global Climate Treaty, urging them to go slow, to not get panicked by scare stories, by bad science, and consider carefully before they take important policy steps. Right now we have the Leipzig Declaration based on a meeting we had in Leipzig last year, which Fred Seitz attended. And at this meeting, again the same conclusion was reached, that we should go slow, that the science was not ready yet to give us firm answers, that we should not undertake hasty policies which would cause, which would have great economic and political consequences. This Leipzig Declaration has now been signed by over 100 scientists who work in this field. It's been published, and we're getting more signatures in every day. So I think our number is growing, and they can no longer marginalize us. It's interesting to see how the IPCC summary has been misused, and how the scientists who worked so hard on this report are being misused by the politicians and by the political scientists. The major conclusion in the IPCC summary is the following. I'll read it to you. The balance of evidence suggests a discernible human influence on global climate. All I can say to this is, well, what do you know? It's like telling us that the Earth is round. Of course, there is a human influence on climate. We've known it for a decade or more. That's not important. Every scientist would agree to this, that there's some human influence on climate. I can give you many examples of human influences on climate. But this does not mean that there's going to be a substantial global warming in the next century. And notice that they don't say this. This is just implied. You see, this is a statement, it's a term of art. This is really a contrived statement. It's contrived because it makes the scientists who worked on this report feel, well, that's all right. I'll just hold my nose. I'll swallow hard. I can live with this. But to the politicians, it means something quite different. It means that all the scare stories that have been developed by activists must be true. It means to them that there will be flooding of coastal areas. Well, all the things that Sally recited are going to come true. Agriculture will collapse. People will die in heat waves. Malaria will spread all over the world. Billions of people will be at risk, etc., etc. And as a result of this, the politicians are interpreting this innocuous phrase, which really has no meaning, as meaning exactly that, meaning that there's a catastrophe coming. Look at the State Department, for example. They've said in Geneva, when they had the conference just 2 weeks ago on implementing the climate treaty, they said the first and foremost reason for launching this new direction is the science. Well, what's this new direction? That's, of course, the scary part. The new direction, which our State Department has taken and pushed very hard on the rest of the world, is to supplant the voluntary guidelines in the climate treaty with mandatory ones. The voluntary guidelines in the treaty ask every nation to voluntarily reduce their emissions of carbon dioxide, meaning, of course, to reduce the burning of fossil fuels, meaning, of course, to reduce energy use. But it's voluntary. It can be done by energy conservation, by increased efficiency, etc., etc. You know, all the usual things. This is now to be replaced by a mandatory policy, which will have targets, so much reduction by such and such a year, fixed targets, legally binding time frames. How is this to be done? Well, we have the word of our government on this. I have a direct quote from an assistant secretary of the Department of Energy. First of all, he refers to the science as, quote, convincing and compelling. You see how they now sort of got rid of the science. That's all taken care of. We don't need the scientists anymore. They've told us what we want to hear. Now we can go on and make policy. Well, he says, in a very disarming fashion, the administration's policy does not call for new taxes, does not call for command and control regulations, it does not call for higher energy efficiency standards. How are they going to do this? He doesn't say. Maybe they'll switch wholesale into nuclear energy. Would you believe that? I wouldn't believe that. Maybe they'll just plant lots of trees. That's not going to be very effective. I think, who are they trying to fool? I think what's happening is that they're trying to wait until the election is over. They're trying to box in the Congress by means of an international agreement, and then they will have energy taxes raised. BTU taxes, carbon taxes, you name them, gasoline taxes, whatever, with the money being applied for the types of research that they feel is important, that is lots of money going into solar energy research, renewable energy research, and the usual things that we've seen in the Nixon administration and Carter administration. They didn't work then, they won't work now. Thank you.
What was the name of that Assistant Secretary of the Department of Energy that made that statement?
Dirk Forrester, F-O-R-R-I-S-T-E-R.
Is he one of the anti-nukes that Hazel O'Leary brought in?
I don't know, never heard of him.
Yeah, never heard of him before.
This comes out of a press release.
Yeah. Okay.
He's the spokesman for this new policy in the Department of Energy. Of course, you all know that the spokesman in the Department of State who's actually pushing this is Tim Wirth, former senator from Colorado.
Henry Miller, Hoover Institution. Fran, I'm much less sanguine than you about the effects that all this is going to have. As you know, since you and I have chatted about this, in April of this year, Warren Christopher, the Secretary of State, gave a major policy speech in which he announced that henceforth environmental issues would be co-equal with national security and economic issues in U.S. foreign policy. And to help to lend some muscle to this, as though the State Department weren't muscle enough, 2 weeks ago in Los Angeles, John Deutsch, the CIA director, announced that his agency was firmly committed to what he called environmental intelligence to support the policymakers. And so I think what we're going to see is even more of a formal process of the Al Gore version of environmentalism becoming part of U.S. foreign policy and being sprayed by the State Department and being reinforced with data in quotes from the intelligence community. So I think the U.S. policy and by extension, international policy through agencies like the UN are going to get much, much worse before they get any better.
Well, the policy, of course, is a White House policy. The State Department is pushing it enthusiastically, but it is a White House policy. All of the departments are involved in this. It's quite clear. As you just mentioned, even the CIA is involved in this. I don't know why. But it is a dangerous policy. It will, by imposing mandated targets and timetables, it will cause economic havoc. In a sense, the United States is not going to suffer as much as some other countries. I think the third world is going to be in very bad shape if they try to obey this, because they desperately need more energy in order to grow. If you want to have a better standard of living, you have to use more energy. These matters are going to become clearer after a while. The reason I'm somewhat sanguine about the situation, or not as pessimistic as perhaps you are, is because of the action that's been taken already by the U.S. Senate. Interestingly enough, 2 separate letters have been sent to the White House addressed directly to Bill Clinton. One by a group of Republican senators under Frank Murkowski, and the other by a group of Democratic senators under Bennett Johnston. And basically these 2 letters say very similar things. They say, we're not going to ratify any amendments to this treaty until you come up with better scientific and economic justifications. They're very upset about this, and they certainly don't want new taxes.
Yeah, there may be some new faces in the Senate, though, by next year.
Yes, that's always possible.
Apropos of what was just said, the climate treaty, the climate conference at Geneva just last about 2 weeks ago, the decision, the general conclusion was they were going to have to cut fossil fuel consumption by about 50%, here in another maybe 10 or 15 years. And the unfortunate thing is that even though the Senate didn't ratify the biodiversity treaty, Bill Clinton is going ahead and beginning to oppose it. Even though nobody has ratified anything that happened at Peking, the administration is going ahead and carrying out these procedures. Can the administration, independent of the Senate, go ahead and do these things? They don't seem to really worry about what our elected legislators say. They seem to have an agenda, and this is an attack on the industrial capacity of our nation. You start cutting back massively on fossil fuel consumption, you're going to destroy this nation. Is that perhaps the agenda?
You may be right. I cannot read people's minds. The 50% figure came from the British Environment Minister, who said we should be cutting energy use or carbon dioxide emission by 50% or more. They will probably argue that we should go in steps, 10% first, then 20%, and so on, do it bit by bit, as we did with the CFCs. In fact, they're taking the Montreal Protocol as kind of a model for what they would like to do with CO2, except I don't see how you can possibly ban the use of CO2. It means banning all fossil fuels. It means banning use of all energy. I don't see how it can be done. The taxes that would have to be instituted would be punitive. I mean, you'd have $3 gasoline. You'd have a doubling of electricity prices. It would hit the people in the lower income brackets particularly hard. And it would cause all kinds of havoc. But as you point out, it would impact on the industrial strength of our country and really deal a blow to economic development generally.
Alex Magnus, I would like your comments as to who you think is behind this and organizing such a widespread, coordinated program here on all levels of government and various arms of government to impose these type of restrictions that some of us, or maybe just a few of us, feel are going to be so detrimental to our country and our society, our way of life, our constitutional protections, and so forth.
Well, I don't have any hard information, but of course, I would guess the usual suspects. I mean, starting with Al Gore in the White House, Tim Wirth in State, Babbitt in Interior.
But this goes back to the Republicans too, with the New World Order for President Bush.
Yes, there are some of these people in the Republican Party as well. There's no question about that. Incidentally, if they do go in for taxation, tremendous amounts of money will be taken from the American consumer. Tremendous amounts. You know, every penny increase in gasoline tax is $1 billion of revenue. It's a very simple number to remember. 1 penny of gasoline tax is $1 billion revenue. We've already set up a global environmental fund, in case you missed that, GEF, in the World Bank, which is designed to funnel money from the United States and from industrialized countries to the third world to help them adjust to this new environmental regime, to make it easier for them. And as far as I can tell, the GEF is open-ended. There's no limit to how much can be put into it. They may even decide to fund the United Nations directly out of this sort of taxation, and that means that it will be out of the control of Congress. Congress will not have to vote money for the operation of the UN. Some congressmen may like this because it'll relieve them of the responsibility, but it'll also mean that you'll have a body, an international body that will help run your lives, made up of people who have no accounting towards you, who are completely unaccountable, and who are supported indefinitely by their own method of taxation. So it's something to ponder.
One of the things that all of the speakers today and all of us here have to contend with is the abysmal level of ignorance in our society and the dumbing down of America, not just in lowered SAT scores, but practically everywhere, that allows the government to get away with junk science and emotionalizing all these issues. Recently, an article appeared in the paper, local paper, that 65% of American adults did not know how long it takes for the Earth to go around the sun. I said, bold to dash, that can't be true. You know, every child knows that, so I asked one of the kids back there, and sure enough, they got the right answer. But I took that poll and went to work, and I asked my technologists, my secretaries, everybody I could, and I came up with 70% didn't. And we have that to contend with from now on. Another one was a test given for graduates, 8th grade graduates, in 1880 was administered to seniors in high school, and they flunked it 100%.
Typically, the Freon in your automobile air conditioner is liberated in a head-on collision. And I'm sorry, my name is Hal Strunk. I didn't introduce him. Presumably, if you keep your car long enough, you're going to have to evacuate the Freon from it and replace it with something else. What are they going to do with the Freon that they pump out of the car? Or secondly, what will they do with the Freon when you junk your car?
That has to be recycled. You can no longer junk your car. You have to take it to a certified mechanic who will extract it at your cost, of course. You pay for this. Purified and store it and recycle it. People have gone to jail already. The contractors were put in jail in Florida because they did not extract the Freon from refrigerators of houses that were damaged in Hurricane Andrew. I think that's pretty tough. They allowed some of the Freon to escape into the atmosphere.
What if you have one of those front-end collisions? You go to jail for that?
Well, if you are guilty, yes, I suppose so. Unless, of course, you're killed, in which case you get off free.
Your state will have to pay.
I'm Mike Oliver. I see we have here actors in media, read their line. And what I noticed all the way through, the problem that I see is a lack of accuracy in the media. really. And the news media in Carson City, I'm from Carson City, I hear all sorts of stories about how we are all going to die if we have this nuclear repository in Nevada. Newspapers are full of it, full of it. And I think that what we really need is to have a truth squad. And I couldn't think of anything better than supporting accuracy in media. That I think all of the organizations that we have here, and all the persons, should do that, and we should really make a concentrated effort, not just have a few guys going to the meetings at the New York Times, but maybe come to 300-400 people and raise hell with them. Because if you did that, and we started a concentrated effort in throughout the country, to write letters to the editors, and to go to the meetings, maybe to Rotary clubs, what have you, and bringing out this fact, and we'll get anywhere. Otherwise, we are simply being buried by a bunch of propaganda beyond any hope of recovery. Because all of these things that you said, Dr. Singh and Dr. Bayunas and all the other fine speakers are basically accurate, but they're not getting anywhere because the general population doesn't know it. And so I think that we ought to think about that way to really get some steps going instead of talking to each other, but you already know. You have to go out and do that and get an organization going. We already have an organization. We have accuracy in media. Go do whatever they're doing in their own organization and also support some kind of a group in that respect.
My organization has, of course, a number of outlets. We talk primarily, we try to talk to scientists. We try to convince scientists to speak up. We then publish our results as best as we can. We provide data and good results to people like Reed Irvine, who consults with us frequently. Access to energy, publishes good material. We have to start somewhere. But I agree with you. Eventually, we have to try to get it all to the public. To the public, yes. Let me say one more thing. In these days, when we have internet, in some ways it's becoming easier to get the word out. So I'd like to tell you what our internet address is so that you can get the full story on the IPCC controversy. I think it says HTTP business first, and you know how that works. And it's www.his.com, and then there's a slash, and then comes this tilde, they call it a tilde, it's this squiggly thing, and our organization is SEPP, Science and Environmental Policy Project. I'm sorry I don't have a blackboard here to write on, but I'll repeat it again, www.his.com/tilde SEPP, all lowercase. Thank you.